dad had always had computers lying around. He was a nerd, and he built computers for the government and did that for a living. And so he always had stuff around the house. And when I was I think I was 9 years old, when he finally built a machine for me that was like my computer, and it was a CP/M-based system. It was probably like 1979 or 1980, and I learned how to program BASIC. I had the Colossal Cave adventure that was like the first text adventure. It was like blew my mind, right? I'm like able to jump into this fantasy world and explore it using technology. And it was difficult for a kid that age. So because BASIC is an interpreted language, I was able to look at the source. I was able to learn something about how it was written, how it was programmed, learn some of the commands. And then I got a book on BASIC and started tinkering around. I think one of the first things that I would call a finished game, my ambition was I'm gonna make Dungeons and Dragons as something that I program up. And I had a really robust character generator that you can ask it to roll a character just like in D&D. The adventure itself was 4 rooms. Like it was start in one corner, there was a dragon in the opposite corner, and I think I had a shield and a sword in the opposite 2 rooms, and it was simple. It was, but you could roll a character with it. But I learned how to do things like dimensional arrays and using the language of the computer to simulate the idea that you have an environment, a space that you can explore. Back then it was all room-based. You go north, you'd say like north, and then you get a description, a text block of what you're supposed to imagine, right? And then you'd use your mind and your imagination to visualize that, and then you can give simple commands. It was a lot of fun, learned a lot about programming, learned a lot about computers, and I think that's when I started shifting into being design focused. As entertainment goes, there's a lot of different choices out there. We have books, we have film, we have music, and all entertainment kind of has some similarities in the sense that the performer or the creator sort of asks you to come along. And if you do, I'm gonna give you some payoff. I'm gonna create some joy or some feeling or some experience. But video games have this extra component which is really exciting, and it's the part that the audience, the spectator, is actually a participant. Before we got games and video games with a narrative to them in this idea of entertainment as an art form, I think what is in literature, in the sense that in many ways, readers kind of participate. They control the pace. We can choose to reread the last sentence before we move on to the next and go back a few chapters and remind ourselves of something that happened, or we can cheat and look ahead. And so the audience is kind of a participant in some ways, but we can't really shape the narrative, whereas in a video game, you can really shape the story. What you do, what the characters in the video game do is up to you. And as we become more sophisticated, and as our simulations have become more robust, and as our ability to draw that world in a way that lets us forget that we're thinking about a video game and believe that we're in that fantasy or looking into that world is a real thing, then all of these things have contributed to video games becoming this whole new experience that no one before us on our planet has had the opportunity to have these experiences. And it allows creators to build an experience that you will participate in, and we can share it with everyone in the world. And that's so awesome and exciting. And it's one of the contributors to this information age we're in, where we're all sort of coming together, and we're all realizing we're all here together and sharing our experiences together. It's pretty cool. When we think about how the future of video games is being shaped, we can think about the people that are creating it, and we can also think about those of us that are consuming it. Fortunately, in this industry, a lot of times they're the same people. I don't know of any successful game maker that doesn't also consume and play video games and love them. I love video games. I've decided to commit my life to this goal of creating happiness and joy in the world, and I've chosen interactive entertainment as this exciting new medium to do that. And I think that's because I love interactive entertainment. I love playing video games. As someone who's living that duality as both a consumer of the video games, but also as a creator of the video games, I think it's very clear to me that it is the gamers that are shaping the future of this medium. I can't think of a decision I've made or a creative effort I've been involved in the craft that wasn't driven from a desire Never thinking, I bet someone else would want to play this, but always thinking, I would love to experience this. I want this to exist, so let's build it. Wherever we've been true to that, we've been most successful, and I think that's true of a lot of the creators. And I also know that if we are offering something that is not exciting, it fails. It gets naturally selected out. The future DNA of what games become, the design of them, the stories we tell, the styles we create, it is absolutely an evolutionary kind of thing. It's actually more mimetic, right? And so it's that selective effort that defines how that evolution goes. It's really neat. It's like we're talking about software, and it's almost changing over time through what we have usually considered to be a biological process. And that's kind of interesting if you think about it. Video games have a really interesting role to play in the future of our species, and we're just starting to figure it out right now. Because this medium is interactive, because we can participate in it, it's fundamentally going to involve a number of things. One, participation means that we can have experiences that we interpret as meaningful and real, but are in fact simulated experiences. They don't affect anything. So when we imagine our nature as human beings, where we came from, some of the instincts and programming we've had in our brains that helped us survive at earlier times that might not be relevant in today's society, we can have a place to exercise or appease some of those interests. And then the other vector, because it's simulation, we can do things and experience things and practice things and test things that either aren't feasible or aren't safe in real life, in the real world. And this is a component of an accelerated understanding and quality of performance that all of us are having as a species. Anyone who is engaged with video games finds that they're better at certain things than everyone else. And the better we get at our video games, and the more deep the simulations become, the more options there are, the more different types of things that are being simulated, we consume that experience, we consume that information. And I grew up in the primitive video game age. My kid is 12, and he is faster at things that I'm not as fast at. He is better at things, and it's not because his brain evolved that much quickly. We're just talking a single generation here. It's because while his mind was developing, he had access to interactive media that was much more advanced than the interactive media that I had, and the interactive media that I had was the first time. It's really exciting, and I think this is going to transform our species. It's really an interesting experience that all of us have when we're parsing the value of a promise of a new video game. Like, here's a new game that's coming out, and you're trying to think about, okay, what is it offering me? And you might be exposed to the title and a picture or a trailer or a box cover image, or depending on how you're interfacing it, or maybe a friend's telling you about it. But what I've discovered is we tend to parse the promise of a video game on a few vectors. We think about the story, the style, the design. Story and style and design are very interesting to me because I think that sums up the promise of the video game. And you can tell almost right off the bat if a video game promise is going to miss when there is an incongruency with the story, style, and design, when something doesn't fit or something doesn't come through. And let me define story, style, and design to help understand this. Story isn't the premise, it's who, what, why, where, and when. It's the simple, the first sentence of the newspaper article kind of thing, right? Like, is this a wizard defeating dragons to save a kingdom? Style is independent of story in the sense that style speaks to the look and feel of the game. It encompasses art direction and audio direction. You can do any of those kind of story things that I mentioned, from the puzzle to the Space Marine as a cartoon. You can do them as realism. You can invent new styles, and it's quite fun when people do. And then the feel of it feels part of the style too. Its character, its personality, that's part of the style as well. And that's a significant part of the promise of the game. The last component, perhaps the most important component for a video game, is the design. And when I say design, I'm talking about the sum of the point of view. How am I perceiving this? Where's the camera, for example? It's the most common way to think about it, but abstracting beyond the camera is useful for some video game genres and some video game types. The control, what are my inputs? What buttons do I press, and what happens as feedback? Or if it's not buttons, what other inputs am I giving to the simulation, and what is the feedback that comes out? And if there is a nice congruency between these parts of the promise and the parts of the promise happen to speak to a large number of people, then you have one of those big, very successful games. But you can have narrower kind of pitches that reach maybe fewer people, but do have such congruence that those fewer people that it speaks to, they really love. They really love that promise. It really breaks. You get a bad game when the promise is fractured, when you're parsing it. Now, it's also possible to have a perfect promise where I'm excited about the pitch, but the execution fails, and in playing it, it's bad. But if you ask me when we're just looking at it and trying to think, is this going to be good or not, we're really kind of thinking about the marriage between these things. The more we understand the folks that are behind the games, the brand and the people behind it, we might not know them personally or even know their names, but we get a sense of the expectations for quality or for presentation or for story style and design that's a range of possibility from any given creator, right? And we do this for all medium. I don't care if you're talking about paintings or music or film or television or literature. The creator, the brand behind that speaks to how we're parsing the story style and design is fitting. I think the most exciting part about this industry is that we're constantly inventing. In fact, when we do the same thing again, we actually take a bigger risk. It is new ideas that excite us as consumers of interactive entertainment, right? So constantly inventing and being fearless about that challenge of invention. And invention's difficult because if you already knew what it was going to be, you wouldn't be inventing it. It would already exist, right? So whenever we invent, whether it's a design idea or a stylistic thing or something related to the story, we kind of depend upon this trust that there will be inspiration, that there will be revelation, that creative people thinking and bouncing their thoughts against themselves and against each other will result with something of value that emerges from that experience. And you can't get to that result unless you went into it without fear. If you can do that, you're left with nothing but excitement and hope and trust that the things we do in the future are going to be more exciting, more interesting, more evolved, and better than the things we did in the past. And the neat thing is, that's always been true. That's always been true. As far back as you can look at our species, that's always been true. And the fact that we're getting to go so fast now, what a great time to be alive, that we get to see all this acceleration. I bet the people that come after us, it'll be going even faster.